You've spent years making careful decisions with lasting impact. When it comes to investing, the same principle applies. Lightstone Direct gives you access to institutional quality real estate investments with decades of proven experience behind them. Invest directly, no middleman, and a $12 billion plus AUM real estate firm in your corner. Visit lightstonedirect.com. All investments involve risk. Please visit lightstonedirect.com for a full list of disclosures. This is the Doctors Making a Difference podcast, living with metastatic cancer, highlighting patients, doctors, and researchers who are fighting to win against cancer. I'm pleased to welcome Dr. Edmond Ghosn. Dr. Ghosn and I've been trying to find a time where our time zones will connect because he lives in Dubai and I live in Idaho. So we have about a 10-hour difference on time zone. And this is interesting. Dr. Ghosn is a physician, so it's interesting that we have that connection. But we also have kind of an unfortunate connection in that we both have this disease called solitary fibrous tumor. And so I thought it was an interesting connection with someone who has kind of walked a similar path, although I live very far from Dubai and you live very far from Idaho. Dr. Ghosn, would you mind introducing yourself to our audience?
No, thank you, Peter. It's a pleasure being here with you. So my name is Edmond. I'm a physician. I'm originally from a small country called Lebanon, and where I did my medical school. And afterwards, I was not really interested in practicing. So I went for a business school in healthcare strategy and management, simply because I wanted to have an impact on a bigger number of patients at a more larger scale rather than the doctor to patient individual relationship. So after my business school, I started working in different capacities with biotech companies, with pharma companies, and I tried to create one of the first electronic health records for cancer in France. Now, unfortunately, that didn't work out. And that's when I joined the pharma industry in Dubai, where I currently live. So today, in my capacity, I work in a department called Medical Affairs, where we really help different patients and physicians, of course, and institutions overcome very serious disease with high unmet needs, such as cancer. So in my capacity today, together with my teams, we do work on cancer. We help sharing the updates, conducting research, etc. So that's where I am, and that's what I do.
Interesting path. So some of the listeners will be familiar with Lebanon and maybe have visited there, have ties to the area. Many will not. I'm curious, what was it like to go to medical school? Most of the people listening are probably doctors in US and Canada or maybe parts of Northern Europe. But what was that experience like to go to medical school in Lebanon?
Well, it's similar to any other country. Now, the medical school I went to was based on the French system. It's called St. Joseph University. So it's more or less similar to a French medical education. And in Lebanon, because Lebanon has multiple cultures, it's very diverse. You do have also different kind of medical school. You have the American University of Beirut, which is similar to any American med school. And you do have also other medical schools. Now, maybe some of the listeners might connect or already know some Lebanese medical doctors, simply because there are plenty of Lebanese medical doctors who continue their studies abroad, either in the US, in the UK, in Europe. As a Lebanese people, we're well spread across the world.
Another question, most people when they start medical school think they're going to be a doctor and they're going to go help diagnose disease or do surgery or help people individually. How did that transition happen as you finished up your medical education? You decided to take a different path, which impacts perhaps a much larger group of people, and you became interested in systems analysis and developing things that interacted with so many patients. How did that process happen?
Correct. Maybe like you, like many other medical doctors, we start from the beginning having this idea that, okay, I want to become a doctor and help patients. Now, throughout my studies, my 7 years of studies, especially the last couple of years where I was in the hospital during my rotations, I started noticing that throughout the value chain between a physician and his patient, there are many elements that needs to be perfectly aligned for the patient to get the maximum benefit and the highest value in terms of care. Some of those elements are controlled by the physician, like if he's updated, if he's aware of the data, et cetera, which is becoming more and more challenging today with all the updates that are coming, every single day. On the other hand, at the level of the patient, you also have some personal challenges, whether you understand, whether you're asking the right questions, whether you sometimes want to challenge something that is told to you. Plus, you have the culture aspect as well. But in between those two elements, you have multiple points that are completely independent from the physician and from the patient. That's what I was interested in. So, for example, healthcare policies, access to medicine, appropriate pricing for medication, etc. Those are the topics that I was interested in. And from experience, and probably you've seen it as well, and many of the listeners would have seen it in their practice, systems do not work as we want them to work. Sometimes it's challenging, sometimes it's not for the benefit of the patient, sometimes it's slow. So for me, addressing this middle part for me was way more impactful and way more interesting, which I did, what I've mentioned before. I tried creating an electronic health record when patient records were still on paper or on Word documents, like more than 10 years ago. Today, it's becoming very common. I also very early tried to utilize health data with predictive model. That's mainly with insurance company on how to incentivize patient to stay healthy. That's becoming also quite common today. So those are the systems or the systems that I was mainly interested in. And even in the pharma industry, if I look back at my last 12 years in pharma, I can tell you that indirectly, for cancer specifically, together with my teams and my colleagues, we have helped probably more than 10,000 patients across multiple countries, which is something that I'm absolutely proud of. Now, patients don't know my name, and I'm absolutely fine with this. We work in the background. And if I can share an example, the moment you have a physician sharing with you a story that his patient survived his cancer due to our science, that's something very fulfilling and very interesting. And we hear the story very, very frequently.
I've found, just like you have, Edmund, that every business is just made up of people. And when you look at what makes people care is that when it's a story about a person. When you say, I'm doing this work, this research, this system, so we make a difference for an individual. And when you hear those stories back, then you're gratified. And like, I'm a primary care physician, so on the front line of medicine, when lots of things happen, the thing that keeps you coming back for more is, well, that person really improved because of what I did, or we gave them this treatment, or we did this intervention. And now look, they're out there doing sports, or they're doing all these activities that they would not have been able to do. So, and when it comes to cancer research, what means more to the researchers than those stories? So I think it's nice when you can connect with those 10,000 people. That really does keep you coming back for more and more. That's pretty cool.
I can share this story. I just remember something. So that was the turning point between my med school and my business school. At the beginning, and it was again in healthcare strategy and management. I think on the first weeks of business school, one of our professors asked us to write down on a small metro ticket, or like in Paris, they used to be the small metro tickets, your ultimate goal. And my ultimate goal was, and is still the same, it was helping as many patients as I can on a large scale. So I've put it, of course, in French. And that's something that's very aligned with my values. And that's something that, I aspire to do every single day at work and on the personal level.
Well, that has to be the core driving force behind the whole business and behind the doctors that work for them. Another question, I'm sure somebody listening to this says, all right, I work in surgery, I work in primary care, I work in my specialty, but I'm interested in doing something more aligned with the pharmaceutical industry. How does a doctor make him or herself more employable or more a candidate for that kind of work?
Well, that's a big question. There are no golden rules from that perspective. Now, definitely familiarize with pharma does, because in pharma, we have very specific roles. So, for example, I'm in medical affairs. You have also a research department. You do have a commercial department. All departments are interesting and at the end of the day, serving the same objective. So, my first advice would be contact people in pharma, ask them about their job, ask them about what they do on a daily basis, what's their objective, etc. Two, there are plenty of material available online, very pretty decent material available online. You can also use AI, ChatGPT, or any other tool to give you some kind of summary of what someone in pharma does, depending on the roles. And three, the best way is just apply, go through interviews. It's an interesting way of getting live feedbacks. So in the interview, you can just ask, those are my credentials. That's what you are looking for. Tell me for next time how we can connect. What do I need to do to connect? Maybe it's about having a little bit of more business acumen, more business training, a small, maybe starting in research, maybe doing an additional course, maybe starting in this department. So that's also a way to really know how to transfer from practice to pharma.
Oh, interesting. I appreciate your thoughts on that. That's not something that a lot of doctors would consider, but somebody listening is probably thinking, hey, maybe I want to be a little bit more like Edmund and start things from these systems and trying to connect people with the treatments and research and development side of it. That is an interesting path. Thank you for sharing that.
And I would like to add one more thing. So there's also this thought that, very frankly, this thought that pharma or it's big pharma, it's very stigmatized, if I can say. That's not true. Of course, everyone has his belief and assumptions, etc. But the best way is, again, by connecting us, asking real questions and getting real answers rather than just being influenced by those assumptions.
No, it's a good point. Well, like I said a minute ago, businesses are made of people. And if you get to know the people, you realize the core driving force for the individual that showed up at work is to do good. And you can look at corporate goals and look at profit chains and all those different things. But the individuals you're talking to are people just like you and me who want to do some good and want to come back at the end of each day to their family and be responsible and be a good member of their community. So, yeah, it's really an interesting path. And again, most listeners don't live in Dubai either. That's an interesting place. It's a very multinational place to live. I'll bet that's been an interesting place for you and your family to live.
Absolutely. It's a melting pot, very diverse, very dynamic. What I can say as well about Dubai and the region, that's maybe one of the regions that is investing heavily in healthcare, meaning that they have the will, the capacity, the capability of upscaling everything related to healthcare. So you would find incredible doctors trained everywhere, incredible institutions. And we're just starting as a region to be on the map for research as well in clinical trials. This whole region was not really represented in clinical trials. So it's starting. So it's really a very fertile ground for healthcare in general and medicine specifically.
Oh, it's exciting stuff. Well, Edmund, tell us your story about finding this tumor. We talked at the beginning. You and I have this unfortunate connection that we both have SFT, solitary fibrous tumor, which for those listening who may not know, solitary fibrous tumor is a rare type of sarcoma. It can arise in the central nervous system. It can arise in the lungs. It can arise in the soft tissues of the extremities. It can arise in the abdomen. It can arise almost anywhere. And then a small percentage will metastasize and cause future troubles. But you can imagine if you find a large tumor in an inconvenient place, it can cause terrible trouble. But with that in mind, tell us your story on that.
So, like you said, it's incredibly rare. And I'm just going to mention something and a learning that I got from this. So, back in August 2023, I was having headaches, just mild headaches, regular headaches, and neck pain here on the right side. And of course, I thought, like anyone else, I thought, okay, it's because I'm not sleeping well, it's because I'm stressed. But the headache was constant. So, I went to a neurologist, and the neurologist determined that it was tension headache and referred me to a physiotherapist to do some exercises for my neck and gave me some painkillers, which obviously didn't help. Maybe a week later, I was just playing with my son. When I stood up, I got dizzy, really dizzy. And that's where many of your previous medical education kicks in, and you remember that, okay, chronic headache, not chronic headache for many days, plus dizziness equal, let me go and get it checked. So I went to the ER of a hospital here in Dubai, did obviously an MRI. In the beginning, they wanted to do an MRI because I was, complaining from my neck mainly. They wanted to do a cervical MRI, but I insisted on having a brain MRI. Did the MRI, and that was, the shocking moment because my neck was fine, and that's what they told me first. So the good news is, like, your cervical MRI is okay. The bad news is you have a big tumor. And of course, similar to when you got your diagnosis, of course, I was shocked. I didn't understand what was happening. So it was a big tumor the size of like my fist here, compressing my brain. So there was a midline shift. At this stage, we didn't know what it was. There was a midline shift, it was compressing. I also was starting to feel vision troubles, lack of focus a little bit, but very mild. I didn't notice it. But of course, once I saw the tumor, I'm like, okay, those symptoms are all linked to that. So immediately I was admitted to the ICU for an immediate surgery. And before the surgery, the surgeon came to us and told me it looks like a meningioma, which is very common mistake on imaging between meningeal SFT and a meningioma is quite common. So the neurosurgeon told me it's most probably a meningioma, and meningioma are most probably benign. What do you want to do? Would you like to go for the surgery? I said, yes. If it looks straightforward, let's do it. And unfortunately, it was not the case.
The size of your fist, I mean, that's 10, 12 centimeters. It was large,
Yeah, it was 5 by 6 by 7 centimeters.
huge, enough that it was causing midline shift, very symptomatic. I suppose if you had left it there, knowing now that it's a solitary fibrous tumor, it would have just kept growing and causing you more troubles. So good thing you got it out.
Absolutely. Now, I didn't get it out the first time. So we went for surgery, and obviously it was not a meningioma. And solitary fibrous tumor are very vascular. So during the surgery, I was bleeding a lot, and the surgeon unfortunately lost control. He was not able to get the proper help he needed during the surgery. And I'm going to tackle this point later on. He stopped, which, if you're familiar with neurosurgeon, it's very difficult for a neurosurgeon to have a tumor and stop. But luckily, he stopped. Otherwise, I was at high risk of bleeding and high risk of eventually dying. That's a good decision that he took. Now, obviously, the next day, and I was completely not conscious. So I wake up the next day with additional shocks. One, that I was about to die. Luckily, I didn't. Two, it was not a meningioma. Three, it was malignant. And four, it was something called solitary fibrous tumor. And I'm like, I never heard of this. I work in cancer. I know glioblastomas, gliomas, etc., all of that. I know sarcomas, but what the hell is a solitary fibrous tumor? So I started looking.
Yeah, it's just so rare.
It's incredibly rare. And meningeal solitary fibrous tumors represent a small portion of all solitary fibrous tumors. So in terms of incidence, it's estimated to be around 3 to 4 cases per 10 million, which is incredibly rare. So, of course, my first reflex is, okay, this is wrong. This is absolutely wrong. I need to understand this. And plus, I had to deal with the rest of the tumor because nothing was removed. And at the same time, I forgot to mention this. I wake up with my whole left side was very weak. So I had to deal with all these kind of things at the same time. Also better than me, maybe that if you mess up with a tumor, you don't remove it completely, things can get really complicated. At the same time, I was worried about seizures. I was worried about plenty of things, infections, plenty of things. So that's where I started, and I got a lot of help. Definitely, my wife helped me a lot. My family was there, colleagues, friends. So I started activating the whole support system to, one, understand what is that, two, have a treatment plan. Of course, I needed to get it removed completely, but at the same time, because it's so rare and you don't have data, you don't have guidelines, what treatment are you going to do? So that's where, luckily, I went contacted with an incredible neurosurgeon in Hopkins, and I got it removed 2 months later. So first surgery was 1st of September. Second surgery was the 1st of November. He was able to remove it completely. And then my oncologist in Hopkins, we agreed on a proper treatment plan. So after my surgery, I went for chemoradiography. And again, because the tumor was in the brain, I didn't want to affect the healthy areas of my brain. So I went for proton beam therapy, which is more targeted. So I did my surgery at Hopkins and my initial assessment, the PET scan, CT scan, all of that. The proton beam therapy is not available here in Dubai. So I went and I did it in Switzerland, where I stayed for 2 months. Then I came back to Dubai and continued 6 months of adjuvant chemotherapy, which I finished a little bit more than a year ago. And that's where I am today. Touch wood, you can see me, I'm doing well. I'm still doing, of course, checkups every few months, blood tests, MRI, CT scans. So you know the drill. So I'm still in this space now.
Was the adjuvant chemotherapy, what did they use for the adjuvant chemotherapy?
They use Temodal.
Temodar. Yeah, Temodar, temozolomide. Did they use Avastin or anything else, or was temozolomide by itself?
And again, that's where I put my hat of medical affairs, medical doctor experience in cancer. There's no data. There are no clinical trials, of course. There are some retrospective analysis on different kinds of treatments, TKIs, et cetera, including Temodar. Now, I relied mainly on the experience of my oncologist in Hopkins, who is one of the top oncologists, I guess, in the US, and Hopkins being Hopkins in Baltimore, it's a big center. So, just to tell you how rare it is, what I got to know is that he sees also very few meningeal solitary fibrous tumors per year, maybe 3, 4, maybe 5. He does have an experience with this number of patients over the years. And I really relied on his experience, and it made sense as well. So I read as well article on the mechanism of action, on how the chemoradiation part, on what's the benefit of having additional 6 months of treatment with Imodard. So I would say like quite an aggressive treatment protocol. It's similar to the treatment protocol of glioblastoma, if anyone's familiar with it, just to make sure that we attack whatever is left from this tumor as strongly as possible, if it makes sense.
Well, no, and it's interesting to kind of talk to other people who've had this tumor because it is so rare. And because it's rare, the research available is small. It's missing. It's not yet been done. There's some things that have been done, and there's a whole bunch of ongoing research that I think will shed light on treatments and protocols that become a little bit more standardized across the spectrum. But it is interesting to rely upon the expertise of our doctors. And you and I are physicians. And yet, in those moments, you have to say, I must trust your judgment. I can read the studies on my own and come to my own conclusions, but I must trust the judgment of my oncology team because in this instance, I'm not a doctor, I'm a patient. And it does require a lot of humility to do that.
Let me just mention something here. First, when my oncologist suggested the protocol, I said no. I said, no, there's no data. And that's where, my very rational, very, pragmatic mindset kicked in. But then I went back home. And of course, those were sleepless nights. It was not like an easy. But then I took a step back. I really thought, like, what are my options? Okay, there's no data. So based on what should I base my judgment? Of course, if there were randomized clinical trials or at least guidelines, what can I do? Plus, the context of Hopkins, his experience, and all of that, and discussion, of course, with my family, etc., etc. And then, which I believe, of course, you never know if it's 100% right or 100% wrong. I think it's right, like the choice that I made, and I do believe that it's the best choice that we made. So that's where your judgment comes. So just I wanted to mention that first I said no. And then when I tried to read a little bit, understand a little bit of it, and put everything in context, it's not lung cancer, it's not melanoma that are studied like hundreds of clinical trials and data and guidelines and protocols. So that's the judgment I made. And I told myself, the moment I choose something, I'm fully committed. That's what I did. It's either you follow completely or not. There's nothing in the middle from that perspective.
And the other thing is, I've kind of reflected on the same things, Edmund, the treatment protocols, because I have to take Timodar. And the treatment protocols, you say, like, well, the data is missing. Should I do this? Is it the right thing? What does the data show? And really, there's not that much data. So you have to go on judgment. It's kind of like the question, well, do I take this or do nothing or just do observation only? And a lot of tumors, especially in the metastatic state, they're not detectable. You can't find them on an MRI scan or a CT, maybe some of the radiation targeted things where you can find a specific marker that will bind to it may help aid in the detection of metastatic disease. But if you leave it untreated and it's got a probability of metastasizing or reoccurring in the same location, it really kind of came down to that decision of do I treat it with nothing or do I use what is available and then just hope and pray that there'll be more things that will come over time as this research is funded and is done properly so we have better treatment protocols.
Absolutely. And I didn't have metastasis. So I did a PET scan and I was metastasis free, which that was the most stressful moment because I do know from now my training and my professional background, that's really a shifting point in your prognosis and in everything. So I didn't have metastasis. Now, at the same time, I did have another discussion with my oncologist about the side effects because we all know that chemo side effects are not easy side effects. So the choice between Temodar and other things was also based on that, on the impact of quality of life, the impact of the side effects, etc. Compared, for example, to Avastin or other TKIs, for example, that might come with additional, more detrimental side effects.
Yeah, there are lots of things being worked on. They've tried a lot of medications on it. And It's a little bit discouraging because the data is so rare. If you listen back to some of the other podcast episodes, you'll meet some of the other researchers I've spoken with, and it's kind of fun because they are interested and focused and really dialed in on finding things that get to the molecular mechanism on this type of cancer. And I'm really hopeful that as time goes on, more of that happens. And the more we raise awareness of these kind of diseases, the more doctors have heard of it, the more people get involved, and the more pharmaceutical companies and NIH grants can focus on some of these more rare cancers because there are treatments. We just have to find them.
Absolutely, absolutely. And of course, it's not optimal, but I think that it's going to get better and better, especially with AI and speed. So now we're producing data and research faster than 10 years ago, for example. And treatment is advancing, and we're understanding more and more the molecular side of cancer, the genetics, the targets, et cetera, et cetera. So I'm quite confident that in my mind, I don't have any proof now. I know that many companies and many studies are working on sarcomas in general, including some SFTs. And I hope that it's going to come pretty fast.
Oh, it's exciting. So, another question, if you think back on this, Edmund, so you're a doctor and you're a patient. You've worn both hats. And then you've also worked in the pharmaceutical industry where a lot of the research development is done on various treatments. And you had a particular emphasis on cancer. What would you tell someone who finds themselves in this same situation? Because it's overwhelming, it's shocking, it's hard to know. And lots of studies have shown once you say the word cancer, the person doesn't hear anything else. The only thing going through their mind is, this can't be. Are you really serious? I couldn't have cancer. What would you tell somebody who's facing that challenge for themselves or their family?
So I would say the first thing is let it out. All the anger, the frustration, the sadness, all of that, just express yourself, cry, ask for help. And this is a part which is incredibly, extremely important. So I asked for help very early, very quickly. Like my wife was incredible throughout the whole journey, my family as well, my colleagues, my friends, like I've mentioned. But I did ask for help for two or three additional things. One, like I've said before, to understand. Contact people, contact experts, contact friends who went through the same. So don't go sit in a corner all by yourself. Just connect with others to understand and to ask for help. I did ask help from an incredible psychologist who helped me, but I also very early asked help from a friend who's, funny enough, he's a leadership coach. Even if it's not tangible, he helped me think properly. Because the moment you are faced with a shock, the moment you're faced with such kind of terrible news, you go into like a vicious circle. Your mind goes in loops where you're not able to think properly. Plus, you're taking medications. I had terrible reactions on cortisone, dexamethasone, and I had panic attacks, anxiety attacks. I couldn't sleep, etc. So you're not okay, but you need to break the cycle. And I really believe that by being proactive and asking for help very early, you'll be able to build foundations on which your treatment plan can be well elaborated, your recovery as well, getting back to work as well. So that's my first advice. And the second thing I would say is I was very disciplined taking care of my body and my mental health. So I did meditations. I was exercising very early as well, because in my case, I knew that I had a second surgery and I lost 30% of muscle mass after the first surgery. Of course, I needed to eat well, build muscles to be ready for the second surgery physically. And this helped me disconnect a little bit from what was happening from cancer perspective, but also having some autopilot routines. That's something I have to do. I will do it. And then I'll focus on something else later on. And the final message is very early, try to put things into perspective. When you work on all of these things together, you need to have an objective to put things into perspective. There are some things we control, there are some things we cannot control. So, for example, do I control where I'm going to do my next surgery? The answer is yes. So I focus on that. Do I control the fact that I might relapse in 5 years, 10 years, 15 years, 1 year, 2 year? No. And whatever I do mentally or physically to try to control this will not work. And coming to that realization very early helps. So those are the few advices that, I would tell someone who's diagnosed with cancer. And the example you gave is if it's a physician, let's say, who's diagnosed with cancer, read as well. I think it's a blessing and a curse to be doctor-patient because one, we can read about articles, what's happening with the disease, what are the outcomes and all of that.
You speak doctor.
But at the same time, you understand. And sometimes ignorance is a bliss. In some cases, I would have preferred not understanding some of the few things I read. But anyway, it goes back to controlling what you can control, asking for help, building the foundations for your recovery.
And it really does help to connect with others who are going through the same journey. It's hard because solitary fibrous tumor is rare, so you have to reach out on Facebook groups or other ways to connect with others because you're not going to just randomly bump into somebody with solitary fibrous tumor. You need to look at the Solitary Fibrous Foundation or go to Facebook. There's a couple of solitary fibrous tumor groups, or your oncologist may have some resources they could turn you to. But that really does help a lot to connect with others who are facing the same challenge. Well, you mentioned you were able to get back to work and you said your wife helped you. How did that work?
So, my wife is a psychologist by training. She's an expert in something called psychosocial rehabilitation. So, helping people, if you want, with disease, either mental disease or other disease, get back to work, which comes with a double benefit, one for the employee and the second for the employer, especially now in the context where it's very difficult to recruit, it's very difficult to replace talents and people who leave the company. Plus, on the human side, it's something very decent to do, to offer a proper support to your employees. So that helps on multiple levels. So what Yara, my wife, did, she created together with her team a very specific program on how to help employees affected by cancer return to work through multiple elements. Now, if you want, eventually you can have also a chat with her. She helped me a lot. So I was patient zero from that perspective. So she did help me. She also liaised back then with my previous colleagues, which facilitated everything. So I was focusing on my treatment. In the background, she helped with everything that facilitated my return to work. And I must say, my employer and my colleagues, I'm very lucky to have them because I got back to work and that's where I work today. The transition was smooth. There was lots of flexibility. I started working, I think, the last week of my chemoradiation treatment. So I was still having some side effects. I was still having fatigue, etc., etc. But it was a smooth transition, and I worked throughout my adjuvant period. So of course, I had to do blood tests. I had some side effects with Hemodar, etc., etc. But there was that flexibility and that support. And for me, I found it incredibly rewarding because on the human side, something that happens to us when we are diagnosed is like, what am I going to do with my life? Am I going to be able to keep my job? Am I going to be able to support my family, etc., etc.? And really, by having this system, again, helps employees affected by cancer, employers as well. And in reality, it will have an effect on, in my opinion, the whole society. So we will live better if we have such kind of program in our society.
Well, I think this has been wonderful that you've shared this and I appreciate it. So, if there are people listening who want to follow your work or they say, I really have a question for Edmond, how should they reach you? How can they contact you or find out more about your wife's program?
Perfect. So I also want to mention that last year I just kicked off an initiative on LinkedIn. It was not nothing very formal. It's just an initiative for free, of course, offering help with patients or families affected by cancer, not from medical advice perspective, but really to the basics, like understand what it is, asking the right questions, which is something incredibly important, navigate the system, getting second opinions, etc., etc. So I kicked off this initiative last September, I think, and so far I helped around 40 patients. Some of them are friends, some of them are colleagues, family members, and some of them that I absolutely don't know. So please, in case you need help, reach out to me on LinkedIn, by message or through email, and I'll be very happy to help. For my wife, her name is Yara Kamel. You can also check what she does on LinkedIn, and you can also drop me a message. I'll put you in touch with her.
So helpful. Edmund, thank you for taking the time to do this. It's very meaningful for me as a patient with solitary fibrous tumor to hear somebody else's experience and to reflect with you. And I'm confident at least somebody listening will reflect on this and say, okay, if Edmund can do this, I can do it. It's one step at a time because there's so many uncertainties. But thank you for so humbly and so honestly sharing your story. And I look forward to staying in touch with you. Thank you so much.
No, absolutely. Absolutely. And thank you, Peter. I think what you've done with your platform is something incredible because it addresses a high need that not only me, but other patients with cancer would have beyond solitary fibrous tumor. And I really think that if we put all efforts together, like you've gone way out of your regular way to create this platform, and I think if we all put efforts, small, big efforts all together, I think we'll get to a point where cancer becomes a chronic disease like diabetes or any other chronic disease. So that's my ultimate goal now.
I totally agree.
So thank you, Peter.
Thank you so much. Thanks for tuning into the Doctors Making a Difference podcast. And thank you for what you do to help your patients and your community. Your work truly helps so many people. We produce this content to help you have the tools you need to stay in medicine and to highlight the amazing work being done by physicians around the world. Please note that while I am a physician, and many of the guests on this program are also physicians or other professionals, the discussions on this podcast do not represent my employer or any professional organizations to which I belong. This podcast is for your information and entertainment only, and should not be taken as professional advice. You should seek appropriate professional advice pertaining to your own situation. Please check out more of our content on our website, doctorsmakingadifference.com. Also, please follow, like, or subscribe on your podcast player or YouTube channel, and give us a 5-star rating. It really helps to spread the message. Finally, if you'd like to be a guest on the podcast, or if you'd like to nominate someone else to be a guest, please visit the website or email admin@doctorsmakingadifference.com. See you next time.